So let's bow in for class. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to do the last half or so of the last chapter of Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness by Khenpo Sultan Gyatso. And now he's getting really into the very beautiful and most advanced part of this teaching. Let's see here. Okay. So I'm going to go over the first half of the chapter a little bit rapidly before we get into the second half, which is what we're mainly doing tonight. I'm reminded of a tantric text that Vajrayana text that I work with, the first words of which are, phenomenal existence is perfectly pure and naturally and spontaneously present. I'll repeat that. Phenomenal existence is all of this stuff: sounds, sights, smells, tastes, senses, and in thoughts too. So it begins, this text. Phenomenal existence is perfectly pure and naturally and spontaneously present. This is the theme, really, of the last part of the Zhentong teaching. And it carries you all the way into the Vajrayana, frankly, to the end of Vajrayana. It's so profound. Phenomenal existence, this that we're in the midst of, is perfectly pure, and naturally and spontaneously present. This is the real world. And we can, and we're being exhorted to, tune into this and live in this, and not in the world of dreams, the world of concept, the world of hopes, fears, judgments, good and bad, all of which is like a pollutant to this phenomenal world, which is naturally pure and spontaneously present. So, basically, the heart of the Zhentong approach is talking about a concept called jnana. That's J-N-A-N-A. And the first N has a little squiggle over it that makes it into an N-Y. Jnana. Jna is the root of the word to know in Sanskrit. And na is a nominative, makes it into a noun. So it's knowingness. Jnana. Jnana is the aspect of mind that knows this perfectly pure, phenomenal world, spontaneously present. It is one with it. They are not two different things. They are completely interlocked, you might say. This element is luminous. It's part of the world, illuminating. It illuminates the world, and knowing. And this is the reality that we're being advised to become one with, to realize, to make it part of our lived experience. It's not an object of conceptualization. You can't conceptualize jnana. And so it's not negated by Madhyamaka reasoning. It's the only thing that has absolute true existence, if you can even call it that, because it doesn't exist as opposed to not exist. It's the nature of all. So it can't be conceptualized, not even as the most subtle object of conceptualization. It is the very nature of reality, of our existence. It is something that one realizes through means other than the conceptual process. One experiences it directly, and any conceptual label obscures it. All the teachings of the most advanced teachings of the Mahayana and all the teachings of Mahamudra, which are the most advanced teachings, tantric teachings of the Kagyus, and Mahaati, which are the most advanced teachings of the Nyingmas, are about this non-conceptual wisdom mind and the means of realizing it. It goes by basically two different names, and since they're presented to us in two different languages, we get four words. In Sanskrit, it's jnana. It's also called, from another point of view, vidya, which refers to the faculty of seeing, vidya. Trungpa Rinpoche was given the title by the Karmapa, Vidya Dara. Dara means the holder of vidya, Vidya Dara. There can hardly be a higher title. In Tibetan, these two terms, jnana and vidya, are yeshe in Tibetan, and ye means primordial and she means knowing, or rikpa. And rikpa just means seeing. And you will come across these terms a lot if you study with other teachers. Tsoknyi Rinpoche, for instance, I'm talking about him with some people, talks endlessly about rikpa. That's his theme in life. And there are many others who do it as well. It's really the core of Vajrayana teachings. Rikpa, yeshe in Tibetan. Vidya, jnana in Sanskrit. They both are, all four of those words are referring to roughly the same thing. This pure knowingness that is one with what is known. The black of this sweater, the sound of this voice, all of it, it's one thing. And this space that we inhabit, it's all part of jnana. Let's focus on jnana as the term tonight because it's most used in this chapter. So one realizes jnana through means other than the conceptual process. You can't conceptualize it. In fact, by its very nature, it's beyond conceptualization. Concept is like a label. It's like you write the word chair on a piece of paper and scotch tape it to your chair. It's like you write the word person on a piece of paper and scotch tape it to the person sitting across from you. That's what concepts are. Jnana is not that. Jnana is pure knowingness. It's what allows each one of us to see the screen, to hear this voice effortlessly, to be a sentient human being effortlessly, unstoppably. Even if our senses are damaged, if we're blind or deaf or whatever, the rest, it goes on. You may not see because you're blind, but you're hearing and sensing and tasting and all the rest of it. It's this aspect of reality. And he says in this chapter, for this realization, a guru is absolutely necessary. The student's realization and the guru's realization and the student's devotion and openness of mind have to meet in such a way that the student, the disciple, can experience that non-conceptual wisdom mind directly, powerfully. We all experience it. It's just a matter of how powerfully we experience it, you might say. And this experience forms the very foundation for our practice as we move forward. From then on, I'm quoting now, he uses that experience as the basis of his practice, his or hers, nurturing and fostering it until it becomes clear and stable. And it's here all the time. So it's not like we're creating something that could be changed or destroyed or modified. We're just tuning into what's already here. Luminous, self-aware, non-conceptual mind that is experienced in meditation. When the mind is completely free from concepts, and this is absolute reality and not a consciousness, not a vijnana, he says. See, a vijnana, it has the word jnana in it, right? Vijnana. And what that means is divided consciousness. How divided? Divided into this and that, into knower and known. That's our normal modus operandi. We think we move through the world as a knower who is knowing things like this computer screen. But that is illusory. That is just an idea that that's there and I'm here. In fact, the knowingness is happening all the time in complete union. There is no knower and known. It's just a continual knowingness that we move through. Let's just do it for a minute. Everybody take a good meditation posture because it helps. You don't really need it. You don't need a meditation posture to practice jnana. You can do it standing on your head. You can do it sitting on the toilet, resting in the bath. But we're just going to do it take a posture because it sort of pushes your mind towards awareness. And you bring your awareness right here. It already is right here. So you just acknowledge it. Here it is, filling this space. These sounds coming out of this mouth and your computer screen, your speakers, the images. Now that I mentioned it, the feeling of your bottom on the chair, thoughts that may come and go. Maybe there are some smells if you're burning incense. One or more of you might have a little incense going, or not. All these things come and go, and this is this space that we're in of knowingness. The knowingness in this space are indivisible. The space is called dhatu in Sanskrit, ying in Tibetan. And when we reside in this space and see everything through the clear lens, it isn't even a lens, it doesn't actually exist as a lens of jnana, then we're in what's called the Dharma Dhatu, the space of truth. Dharma, in this context, means phenomena, but it also means truth, and Dhatu means space. The Dharma Dhatu. In Tibetan, it's Che Ying. Che is Dharma, Ying is space. The great teacher Longchenpa wrote 7 treasuries. They're legend. I'm just reading a book about Patrul Rinpoche's life right now, and how he just about memorized the 7 treasuries. That's almost inconceivable. They're big, each treasury. And probably the ultimate treasury of Longchenpa is called the Treasury of the Dharma Dhatu, the Chiying Tsud. Tsud means treasury. Chiying is Dharma Dhatu, the Dhatu, the space of phenomena, or the space of the real. The Chiying Tsud. I would love to study it with you at some point. Love to, because I need to go over it again and again for myself. It's so profound. It's just mind-blowing. I said this before. I once asked Trungpa Rinpoche if he could name the greatest. I was sacrilegious, and I said the Babe Ruth of Tibetan Buddhism. And without even pausing, he said Longchenpa. And probably the treasury of the Dharma Dhatu is Longchenpa's penultimate work. So it'd be wonderful to go through it with you at someday. So here we are, Jnana. And this is really the third turning of the wheel of the doctrine. The first were the Hinayana teachings of egolessness. The second are the Mahayana teachings that we studied on the Rangtong level, which are really about emptiness and proving that nothing has any own being, svabhava. Nothing has these 3 qualities of existing through time, being unitary, one thing, and independent. We think that things do. We think that things have svabhava, that they exist through time, that they're one thing and they're independent. But that's just thinking. Nothing has it. And that's the second turning of the wheel. The third turning of the wheel is this teaching, the teaching of Jnana. And the main idea of it is that all of us go through a process of learning and purification through which our natural potential is revealed. This natural potential is such a weak term for it. It's Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature. Tathagata means tata is as it is. Gata is gone too. So Tathagata is gone to as it is. That's an epithet of the Buddha. He went to as it is, truth. And Garbha means essence. All sentient beings, all of us, are fundamentally Tathagata Garbha. Our Tathagata Garbha is veiled by our impurities, by our mistakes, by our confusion, by our belief in I and other. And what the path is all about is removing those veils so that we see and become, truly become, our Buddha nature, which is already there. It's just covered over. It's already in us. It is us. But we have gotten distracted. He says there are 5 reasons that were given for studying Tathagata Garbha, this essence. First, it encourages those who would otherwise be so self-deprecating that they would not even try to arouse bodhicitta, awakened mind. and attain Buddhahood. There are some of us who are so self-attacking, pessimistic, depressed. So the teaching of Tathagata is to teach us that we are fundamentally awake. Second, it humbles those who, having aroused bodhicitta, feel superior to those who haven't. Some people have aroused it, they've seen it, and they feel better than the people who haven't. And this humbles them, this teaching of Tathagata, this Buddha nature. Thirdly, it removes the fault of taking the stains, which are unreal, to be the true nature of beings. Stains are the thoughts and emotions that we have, the ideas about me and my existence, you and your existence, the chair and its existence. These are all stains, all the ideas of confusion, and it removes them. Fourth, it removes the fault of taking the clear light nature, which is real, to be unreal. It's the clear light is, what it is the brilliance. When you begin to come into this Tathagata, this nature, the world lights up, becomes much more brilliant, and we all experience it from time to time in one way or another. There's so many ways to experience it, visually, auditorially, with your heart, and in terms of feelings for another sentient being, all kinds of things, the smell of something cooking, the luminosity, the brilliance of the feeling, of the perception. It's called luminosity. This world is transformed. And when you begin to meet with it and connect with a teacher, someone who can communicate jnana to you, one of the things that happens is you begin to experience this vivid world. Fifth, by showing that all beings are intrinsically of the same nature as Buddha, all of us, it removes the obstacle to the arising of true compassion, because it sees no difference between self and other. We're all fundamentally this Buddha nature, which is so beautiful. We can fall in love with our world and with each other. So, this just to give you some other terms, the Buddha qualities, when a person tunes into this, are those of the non-conceptual wisdom mind, that's jnana, which, when purified, is called the Dharmakaya. The Buddha, the Dharma, Kaya means body. And Dharmakaya is the truth body of the Buddha. It says, when the wisdom mind is not purified, and the qualities are not manifest, and it lies as your potential covered over by stains, by confusions, by misperceptions and wrong beliefs, then it's called Tathagata, because it's your potential. It's the essence, the garba. He talks about the Buddha qualities: compassion, utterly clear seeing, luminosity, skillful means. They can't be grasped by the conceptual mind, and they're not separable from jnana, which also can't be grasped by the conceptual mind. That doesn't mean you can't know it. It just means It's here so much that we're sort of looking at something else, trying to find it somewhere else, many of us. So you can't get at this with, he says, sometimes people say that the jnana is the product of good deeds, vows, and connections made by bodhisattvas on the path to enlightenment. That's not true. Good deeds and vows and things like that don't produce jnana, but they do remove the veils that cover it, and they're necessary practices. So this jnana doesn't know in a dualistic way. It's not divided into a knowing and known aspect. It has no subtle object or gross object. It's not a stream of moments of awareness. It's here all the time, in one with space, completely free of concept, including time and space. So now we get into the second half of this chapter. And he's making the distinction between three levels of knowing and being. And I'm just going to make this very simple. The first level is that of the imaginary nature, of error. This is the level that most sentient beings, most human beings live in. We move through a world of I and other, of things which have labels and names, and we think that the truck really is a truck, is a truck is a truck, and the bed is a bed. This is called the imaginary nature. It's the placing of these labels on our experience, and we live the labels. We live the labels, which include good and bad, love and hate, aversion and attraction, pleasure and pain. You say, gee, I get a lot of pleasure when I eat roast beef. Of course, not always. Sometimes you might be completely full. It might make you sick. But we tend to live these labels, and this is called the imaginary nature. It's like living in a dream world. This is mistaken, confused. It's the world of samsara. We live in a world of fictions when we live in samsara. The whole world that we see, which is true, think of this flesh, the sound of the voice, is covered over by these labels, and we tend to live our life through concepts. I should do this, I shouldn't do that, I hope for the other, I fear for this. This is the imaginary world. Now, the imaginary world, nonetheless, contains phenomena. The blue sky, the green tree, the pink flesh. These are called, this is the second level. It's called relative world, relative truth. It's the fact that everything arises is different, one thing after the next. Each word that's coming out of this mouth, the images on your screen, whatever it may be. But these things that are different, they have sort of two different modalities. One is the false modality. We think that they actually exist. that they have real being, but they don't. They're just a continual changing presentation, like these words are changing all the time as they come out of this mouth, like this image that goes across the screen of my face is continually to everything. And yet, there are things that are presenting and changing. You can't grasp them. This is the relative truth. When we concretize it, when we give it a name, when we try and fix it, it becomes part of samsara. When we see that it has no true existence, no svabhava, doesn't exist in time, isn't single, it isn't independent, it's just a constant changing matrix, then we begin to move into the world of truth. And this is the third level. So relative mind, the second level, it's empty of svabhava, has no svabhava. And its true nature is the absolute clear light of the absolute truth. So we got imaginary nature. I'm going to get working up to the last one, which is mere conceptual creations. He said it's like the tiger in a dream. You're dreaming of a tiger. You could actually be afraid of it. It doesn't exist, it's just a dream. And we do this all the time in our lives, don't we? Each one of us, we find things to be afraid of and to be pleasured by. The person sitting next to us isn't. It's our particular idiosyncratic, developed fiction. He says, for example, talking about the imaginary nature, it's really interesting, the imaginary nature. Past events. What happened to you yesterday? What happened to you 5 minutes ago? Don't exist. They're just stories that you tell yourself, and they're very incomplete and partial and delusory, and they blur and change things. And if two people are watching the same event and each one of them 5 minutes later describes it, you'll get two different stories. They may have some similarities, maybe, but they'll be different because each person is seeing it through the lens of their neurosis, of their past conceptual mind, which is filtering the way they see the world. This is the imaginary nature. Doesn't exist. And it's always past events, he gives this as an example, are don't exist at all. They're simply names and concepts for things imagined, but which don't exist anymore. It's like, I wrote in my notes, a rabbit with horns. Doesn't exist, except in your imagination. They used to have a statue of a rabbit with horns up outside of Jackson, Wyoming, on the way to Teton Village. Pretty big statue, too. It's like about 10 feet high, rabbit with horns. Doesn't exist except in your imagination. That's the imaginary nature. The dependent nature is the fact that the dream tiger, it actually happens as a dream, and it can produce fear in the dreaming mind. But it's not substantial in an absolute sense. It's just a passing phenomena. And at the Madhyamaka level, they use reasoning to prove that the dependent nature, this relative nature of different things existing relatively, black, red, loud, soft, sweet, sour, all this stuff, exists only in a moment, something you can sort of point to as it's disappearing, has no true existence. And yet it constitutes this world that we live in, and it's very beautiful. And the perfectly existent nature truly exists in a purely non-conceptual way. It's the fact that the relative truth has no true existence. That's the absolute truth. It's empty of perceiver and perceived. There is no perceiver and perceived. That's a myth that we really believe in. It's completely free of any conceptualizing the absolute truth. It knows in a way that's foreign to conceptual mind. It's completely unimaginable. And that's why it can be said to truly exist. So these are the three modalities. There are the three modes of emptiness. Imaginary nature is empty in the sense that it doesn't exist at all, just a mental creation, a rabbit with horns, Donald Duck. They never exist except in the imagination, these things, in the imaginary nature. They have no svabhava, no self-nature. 3 points. Exist through time, the independent, and one thing. They don't have it. The dependent nature is empty in the sense of something existent, but not ultimately existent. It's empty of the imaginary nature, but it still does not truly exist because it's dependently arising. In comparison, this sound, my voice, relative to the silence, this is the dependent or relative nature of truth. We live in a world of phenomena. The phenomena are all relative nature. It's beautiful. Thank goodness we have them. They're the stuff of our lives. They allow us to play, to make love, to be creative. And then there's the perfectly existent nature, absolute emptiness, the non-conceptual wisdom mind, non-arising, non-abiding, and non-perishing. It is primordially existent and endowed with qualities. You see, the absolute mind and the relative mind, these are the two truths. They exist in union. In order to say that something is absolutely true, meaning it has no svabhava, you have to point to the thing that you're talking about. That peach that's sitting on your table, whatever it might be, that tire on your car, that sound coming out of your friend's mouth. And you say that it exists relatively, which means it doesn't have any true existence, and it doesn't have any true existence, which is the ultimate. And the two are in complete union. They need each other in order to be expressed. Is that clear? Let's stop for a second and talk about that. This is the most profound aspect of the sort of the middle level of the Buddhist teachings, and it carries right into Tantra. What it's saying is the imaginary nature, the rabbit with horns, forget it. It's bullshit. The fact that you've made someone into your enemy is probably baloney as well. But the very fact that right now we're sitting here looking at the green of Robert's shirt, hearing the sound of John's voice, these are the union of the relative and absolute truth. The absolute truth is what allows us to see, to appreciate, to what's the word? To know these things so vividly. And it's the things that we know so vividly that are the relative truth. You have to have both. Comments? The union of the relative and absolute truth. You can't have one without the other. Trip.
I have a question. So in that split second where you've made somebody your enemy, let's just as an example, in that split second, is that relative truth real? Is that what you're saying?
The only thing that's real in it is that there is a person there that you're identifying, you know, for a moment. But the fact that they're your enemy, that's a fiction. The concept is the fiction. The concept that you put on the relative truth is the fiction. The fact that
So
you,
is, excuse me, I'm sorry. So is the I other, what is the relative truth? Is the aggression, let's say, is the concept that's laid on top of the relationship I other to the other person? Is the I other the relative truth, and then the aggression, the making an enemy of, is that the concept that
yes,
is
yes,
false?
got it. You got it. I mean, in order for us to talk about absolute truth, the fact that nothing has any true existence, right? You have to talk about the no thing that no, doesn't have true existence. You have to point to it. That lamp, that person, you know, that doesn't have true existence, you say. And you've got there you have the relative and the absolute truth, always in union. You can't talk about something existing absolutely unless you talk about something existing absolutely, right? You can't talk about absolute existence as for nothing, you know, the absolute emptiness of nothing. There is no such thing. There's always this arising and appearing, fading away, changing. This is the union of the two truths. The two truths arise and pass away, constantly changing. They don't really pass away, they just morph in union. Absolute and relative truth are constantly in union. You can't have one without the other. It's impossible. What you can have is imaginary world without the other. You can have the world of Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse. And the problem is that we tend to walk through our lives living that cartoon world in one way or another. And that constitutes terrible suffering. The union of the relative and absolute truth are true. And there in the understanding that and living in that world is freedom.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Because this is very confusing for me. So is the are they in union because the absolute truth is in contrast to the relative truth?
No,
It points out that the relative truth is relative?
what the absolute truth is saying is that this hand and gesture has no existence over time. It's a constant passing away. And it's not one thing, it's multiple, all these fingers. And it's not independent. It's dependent on the space around it and the contrast to my shirt and all of that. So it has no svabhava. That is the union of the relative and absolute. You can't talk about absolute, no existence, being not being one thing, being utterly dependent on everything else. You can't talk about those things unless you've got something to talk about, like a hand, like a sound, like a smell. Otherwise, what are you describing? So absolute truth needs the phenomena to describe to be absolutely true. They're in union, absolute and relative. They're two sides of the same coin, reality. That coin is reality. That coin is dharmata. Truth. The only thing that's not true is the imaginary nature. When we walk around and we can get, the crazier we get, the more powerful our imaginary nature is. I remember living down in the East Village and occasionally seeing people walking down the street screaming, dressed in rags and talking to somebody or something, who knows what. There was nobody there. And you avoid that kind of person. That's sort of an extreme example of what happens when you get completely immersed in the imaginary nature. These are great questions, Trip. Thank you. Anybody else? Robert.
Thanks. This is helpful. I'll give it a try. My question through, I guess, an example. If I'm sitting on the beach and I'm looking at the ocean and waves coming in, if I label the waves as good and bad, well, that's a big wave. I like that one. That's a small wave. I don't like that one. Water's salty. I'm in the world of imaginary nature. But if I observe the waves in water just being just simply images that pass immediately in front of me and come and go in an almost instantaneous nature, I'm seeing the relative truth of it because the wave and water are really one another. But then getting to the perfect nature and absolute truth is that I don't even I free myself of the conceptualization of wave, water, and ocean and just see immediately what's in front of me without giving it any label at all. I'm trying to use that to identify what you've just described very well.
Yeah. Yeah, you can, if you drop the label, wave, water, when you have the label, you fix it and the wave becomes stationary for a moment, static, like a prototypical wave. There is no such thing, right? Every one of them is different, constantly changing. That's the union of the dependent and absolute truths.
Okay.
The absolute truth is it does no true existence. It has no own being. It doesn't exist for a split instant. It's already changing, moving, just like these images on the screen, are changing and moving. That's the absolute truth. The relative truth is that there is something that is moving, that is not staying the same, that hand, whatever you want to call it. In order to talk about the absolute truth, you have to have a relative truth. The two are bound in reality. And what's important about this is that we begin to see this world in a way that is free from the stories of past and future. And then we begin to move into a very magical world, the world of Tantra, where everything is arising much more vividly because we're not putting an imaginary concept on it. We're seeing it much more powerfully. And then the whole world of Tantra is about the meaning, if you can call it that the phenomenal world conveys to us, stripped of these false ideas, imaginary nature, when we see it truly vividly. And it's why, like that image on the wall behind me, everything is depicted so vividly in Tantra, because they're trying to help us into this world of vividness. So let me just go on. Got a little bit more here. We've got these three natures then: the imaginary, the dependent or relative, and the perfectly existent, absolute reality. Non-conceptual, without essence. It's not imaginary, and it's not dependent on anything else. The perfect, absolute. So the mind's true nature is this non-conceptual wisdom mind that sees this world, the union of the absolute and the relative. This is the ultimate absolute reality. As long as this is, he says, as long as this is not realized, the clear light nature, the fact that we're seeing all these phenomena, each one of us, acts as the basis for the impure, mistaken, or illusory appearance to manifest. In other words, it is the basis for the manifestation of samsara, which is an illusory false world, and it's a world of suffering, a world of I and other, which doesn't really exist. Once it is realized, it is the basis for pure manifestations. In other words, the Buddha bodies, kayas, and the Buddha realms, and the mandalas of the tantric deities, and so on. Wisdom mind is both emptiness and luminosity. It's empty. Empty of what? Empty of any concept. And being empty of concept, it is luminous, vivid, communicative, powerful, meaningful. I used to think, I communicated with Trungpa Rinpoche. I think he lived in this world. And he just sat there, and he was so happy to talk to you. And he seemed to have no particular sort of axe to grind. Sometimes if you were really neurotic, he would get, oh my goodness, like that. So it's non-conceptual. That's the emptiness. And the luminosity is its power to manifest pure and impure appearances. Impure meaning confused. You can do that too. This is taught in all the sutras of the third wheel of the doctrine, and it's the basis for all tantric practices, which should be seen as a special means, these tantric practices, for speeding up the realization process. What does that mean? That means that we're moving into a different world, a different way of being, each one of us. The more we, especially as we begin to practice Tantra, Tantra is powerful. And more you just do it. You just relax into it. And this applies to your meditation practice that we do here, meditation practice you do anywhere, and especially to tantric practices. You just do them. It talks about the dream, when we get totally confused and involved in a dream. And then once the awakened consciousness returns, one quickly sees the dreams as mere manifestations of the play of the mind, and they dissolve. He says the key to this method of meditation, or rather non-meditation, is dependent on personal instruction from a realized master who can, through his own skill and means on the one hand, and the faith and devotion of the student on the other, cause the relationship to arise and mature in the student's mind. So the meditation process is to rest the mind naturally in its own nature, without contrivance or effort. As Jamgon Kongtrul says in his Encyclopedia of Knowledge in a section on Shamatha and Vipassana, whatever thoughts arise, there is no need to try and stop them. In that state, they simply liberate themselves. And we know this. As soon as you become aware that you're thinking, they just go off into space, dissolve. No effort is required to still these thoughts. And then he says meditation can also be continued between sitting sessions, means meditation and action. From time to time, one can stop what one is doing and rest the mind in its clear light nature, and then try to carry that awareness over into whatever one is doing. So we're freeing our minds from conceptual effort. And he says sometimes there will be the effort to see the emptiness of what arises. Sometimes the effort is to see the clear light nature, the vividness. Sometimes the effort is to see them both as inseparable. Sometimes the effort is to grasp the non-conceptual state, to understand it intellectually, or try and fix and maintain it somehow. All of this is moving in the right direction. May not be there yet, but going in the right direction. So we practice meditation. It's gom in Tibetan, the word, which literally means to familiarize yourself. And it requires discipline. That means you have to sit down and do it every day, ideally. The more the better. It requires perseverance. And you keep doing it until realization arises, and then it becomes natural. It becomes who and what you are. And it will produce a change in your conduct. And finally, we don't accept any of these teachings on blind faith. We have to test them and try them and make them ours, make each one of us make them our own. And when he says this whole thing about a realized master, it completely depends on you and the person that you encounter as teacher and the communication that happens between you. You can meet somebody who everybody else says is ne plus ultra, perfect, a great master, and it won't work for you, maybe, because the magic doesn't happen. It's just like falling in love, There's a magic to it. An openness has to happen between you and the other person. A friendship, a deep friendship. Years ago, Trungpa Rinpoche gave me instruction on how to be a meditation teacher. And quickly he made it clear that it wasn't about giving particular instructions. Now you cross your legs, now you put your hands on your thighs, now you focus on the breath. No. What he said was, it's a negotiation of openness and deep friendship. He says the teacher opens a bit to the student. And you know what it's like when somebody opens to you, in a situation that might feel difficult. You feel touched. You feel moved. You might be encouraged to relax with this person, that you can trust them. And you find yourself opening back in return to them. And then that allows the so-called teacher to open some more to you. And that might encourage you to open back. These things have no particular form. It's the magic of communication, friendship, perhaps even love. And it goes back and forth. He called it a negotiation. Back and forth negotiation. And he said at some point, the student may stop opening. And the teacher has to stop at that point too. Otherwise, they'll frighten the student. And that defeats the purpose. That was kind of a revelation to me, that this was the true nature of what it means to be a meditation teacher. But it requires friendship and intimacy of whatever degree you don't force it, can't. So I'll stop there. And one thing is, you can find your particular teacher, by looking, the one who works for you, and you'll find them at different levels. And they'll be very idiosyncratic to you. Although there may be other people who appreciate this individual as well. But there will be people who will love a particular teacher, so-called teacher, and you won't like them. And that's fine. It's just like we all don't, none of us, we don't fall in love with the same spouse, individual. So I'm going to stop there and we can have a discussion for a little while. And by the way, next week, we're going to go back and read sections in volume 1. I think chapters 43 and 44. I'm going to send out an email. But yeah, yes, it's on Vipassana, the practice of awareness. And we're going to start with chapters 43 and 44 if you want to get going, but I'll be sending out an email to that effect too, in volume 1 of the Profound Treasury. And you can buy it at a big discount from Shambhala Publications if you don't have it already. And if you're in a rush and you want it and it's not going to come fast enough, let me know and I can send you a PDF. Illegal, but there it is. I've got it. Just make the request. So, discussion, sorry. Lodro.
I think I enjoyed the Zen approach at the meeting of the two truths. The way that I was taught that is that reality or the absolute and the relative are like the moon in the water. And I always enjoyed the visual of that because I've heard some teachers say the moon is there, but it's not there, but it's there. And for some reason, it always just caught my attention so much. I guess the second thing that really comes to mind is I wonder if the imaginary nature is really the biggest problem that we face, or is the believing that it's real, that it's the problem? Because I think I've heard some teachers speak of when we get caught in a dream, when we get caught in a bad dream, it's the fact that we believe that it's real, that it's so traumatizing and so painful. But I've heard Mingyur Rinpoche and other teachers say that the best choice when we have a bad dream is to wake up. If we cannot wake up yet, what is the second best choice? It's to know that we're dreaming. And if we know that we're dreaming, even if we're still caught in the imaginary nature, it is not as claustrophobic or as suffocating. And there can even be a certain sense of appreciation for the environment or for the nature of those fireworks that are happening in that moment. So for me, I wonder if the imaginary nature of like this tiger or all the analogies and metaphors in the book, is the imaginary nature really the problem, or is the fact that I believe it to be real, that it's causing all of that suffering? And I don't know. I thought that it was a very complete and thorough chapter, and I very much enjoy going through this book.
Thank you. I think that is very profound, everything you said. The problem with the imaginary nature is that we believe it. I mean, none of us believe in Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, but we might believe that somebody's our enemy and is causing us pain. I'm getting very embroiled with that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Xinyi.
Hi. Thanks, John. I have two questions. The first one relates to your closing comments about teachers. And I actually very much appreciate that because I was discussing the same topic with Miriam on the weekend. I guess my question is, especially, I guess, in this context, we're talking about Vajrayana guru or Vajrayana teacher. And if your teacher, like if you don't have much of a chance to meet the teacher in person on a regular basis, or not even like once a year, for example, is that communication still possible to happen? I don't know if that's clear, because it's a I think it's a realistic issue nowadays for students, because there are just so many students, and teachers generally doesn't travel to our areas that frequently.
It's completely between you and the individual teacher. And there are no fixed rules about it.
Right. I guess I'm just wondering, like, for example, I'm just saying for sake of example, like, for example, if I connect to the Karmapa, but I haven't ever met him. I haven't, he doesn't know me, right? Like, can I still communicate? Like, does that communication still happen just by virtue of you having faith in the person or confidence?
It can, definitely. But the more intimate and real the communication is, the more powerfully it will affect you and teach you. The more distant, then the more you're seeing that person through the veil of your particular personal preconceptions and ideas. So, I mean, Trungpa Rinpoche used to, it was asked this often, and he said, it's all about communication. The more, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think it's realistic issue that if the teacher you happen to connect with is someone that you don't really get much chance to communicate, I mean, physically or virtually, then you don't really get much of that chance, I guess.
Completely up to you. And but I do recommend, you know, if you find a teacher that works for you, that resonates, that is teaching you, you know, that is moving you, the more communication, the closer the communication, the better. Obviously.
Yeah. My second question. So, I have some vague idea about some practices in Vajrayana. For example, like at some stage when you're practicing like a deity practice, you're supposed to see like the form as the deity and the sound as mantra, etc. And it's said to be not just your imagination. but you actually experience it that way, or at least like a good practitioner would actually experience it that way. So I'm just wondering how this works, because it's not an imagination, but it's your experience. Yeah, from where I am, I can't quite wrap my head around that. I'm wondering if it has any relationship with what we're talking about today.
Again, it's completely a matter of each individual. For me, deity worship is largely imaginary. Trungpa Rinpoche, towards the end of his life, had Vajrayogini in his bed. He would, when he got into a car, he would open the door for her to get in before him. So there's a range.
Okay.
You just have to do it. Huh?
I guess we start with imagination.
Yeah, we definitely do. I mean, I do anyhow.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Those are great questions, great thoughts. The main thing that has to happen between a teacher and a student is the introduction of the student to the world of luminosity, which includes emptiness. Sarah.
This is kind of silly, especially considering how beautiful this teaching was, but I feel like it kind of follows perfectly after Ginny's question, this conversation. I've been curious about these AI glasses, and especially as far as like these tantric practices go, where you're imagining the deities or you're imagining that refuge tree. If you're using AI glasses and you're just putting that refuge tree in the background of your what you're seeing, could that possibly speed along this process? Like I could have Vajrayogini hanging out next to me all the time in my glasses. Like if I'm seeing Buddhas everywhere all the time because of the AI glasses, then maybe it could speed along the process.
Possibly. It's sort of like having lots of pictures of the deities around, that would be an earlier technology, just to have them up on your wall and, see them everywhere. I don't really know what the AI glasses are, but I gather that you put them on and you see particular things. Don't want to get crazy.
I guess if I'm seeing a Buddha following me around everywhere, I might be wanting to not be, to rise to the occasion and live in this sacred world with the Buddha.
I don't know. We're moving into a new area. I mean, in Tibet, they never had AI glasses, but they had the sort of the mental equivalent,
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know enough about AI glasses. I wonder what they were like. But in a way, doing all these, when you move into Tantra, you will be doing practices from get-go when you start your Nundro. Those of you there are a few people in this room who already have. You're doing what's called creation and completion practices. Completion is resting your mind in pure awareness. In Rigpa or Jnana, call it that. Creation is visualization, where you visualize a particular deity, like me, which has, and this deity has tremendous symbolic teaching significance. And you always start by resting your mind in awareness. And then out of the awareness comes the visualization. And like it rises out of it. It's like a figure rising out of water. And then you communicate with that. And at the end, you dissolve it back in and you rest in awareness. It's called, in Sanskrit, the term for the pure awareness is called sampanna krama. And the visual, I'm blanking, sorry, senior moment. In Tibetan, it's called Dzogchen, meaning the perfection stage of the path. And then the visualization is called Kyerim, creation stage. Rim means stage. Oh, I'm sorry, Sampanna Krama is resting in space, and creating the visualization is called Utpatti Krama. And you create the visualization out of this space, and there it is, and you relate to it for however long, an hour, doing practices with it, chants, trying to visualize it as completely as you can. When you get, they say, and I've never gotten this good, that when you are really good at visualization, you can see the deity right down to the pupils of their eyes. And then at the end, you dissolve that Utpatti Krama back into the Sampanna Krama. This is creation and completion practice. It's called Yidam practice too. When you're working with a Yidam. A Yidam is a figure like Vajrayogini that represents your enlightened mind. And there are many Yidams. But Trungpa Rinpoche focused us on Vajrayogini practice. And then when you finish, you go through a certain number of stages of that, you begin to do she's in union with Chakra Samvara. And you do Chakra Samvara practice. Union meaning they're having sex. And in fact, if you go up to the top of the, if you're allowed to, the great stupa of Dharmakaya up at Shambhala, what used to be called Shambhala Mountain Center, now it's called Drala Mountain Center. And there's a huge stupa up there, and it's filled with Trungpa Rinpoche's relics in the walls. But up on the top floor, which is, what's the word I want? You're not allowed to go there unless you are a tantric practitioner or Vajrayana practitioner. Is a very large statue, maybe 8 feet high, of Chakra Samvara and Vajrayogini in union. They're standing and they're in complete intimacy. Lots of wonderful images in Tantrism. And then what you go on to, really, in the Kagyu tradition, you go on from these creation and completion practices to the perfection, you might say, of the completion practices, Mahamudra, which culminates in the ability to rest your mind in awareness, in pure reality. In the Nyingma tradition, it culminates in the great perfection, Dzogchen in Tibetan, Ati in Sanskrit. And it winds up in the same place. It's formless awareness. And it's the ultimate, the end of both paths. So that's a quick overview. But along the way, there's a lot of learning how to appreciate and understand in this world in a different way, through the lens of symbol and deity. Any more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there is there a difference between the right spiritual teacher and the spiritual friend that we read about in the Profound Treasury?
Well, there are terms for the teacher at two different stages of the path. The spiritual friend is a term for a Mahayana teacher, and they meet you, your mind, and help you open. And the relationship is one of collaboration and friendship. At the Vajrayana level of the path, the teacher has a very different modus operandi, and it's fierce. Yeah.
I also had the thought that everything that was said about the spiritual teacher, the right teacher, is I, I could apply to the right sangha, to the sangha,
Is what?
to the sangha. I could apply the connection between what you were talking about with the spiritual teacher and to the right spiritual teacher and to the right sangha, which
Yeah.
is what I feel right now.
I had a person who taught me the meaning of spiritual friend way back in the day. This must have been 1980s. His name was Cobancino, and he was he came over here as a priest and functioned at the Zen Center in San Francisco under Suzuki Roshi. And eventually Cobancino became a Roshi. He was Soto Zen, and I don't know the process, but he was made a Roshi by people back in Japan. And he was such a sweetie. Oh my God. He would come to dinner and he'd always brought a present. I've still got some of his presents. And I took him skiing. My wife in those days and I had a place up in the mountains. And I took him up there and I went skiing with him. And I called him, oh my gosh, it's time to end. Yeah. I called him a kamikaze skier. He used to go down the mountain, just straight down the mountain, arms out like this, skis apart, and just go straight down. But one night, we were talking before dinner across a table, he and I. And I said to him, I said, look at this life I'm living. It's very full of pleasure. And I said, maybe I'm just not helping enough people. Maybe I should take someone like Mother Teresa more of an inspiration. Someone who just dedicated her entire life to helping others. And he sat there across the table from me, and he said, I've never forgotten this. He said, a bodhisattva finishes the conversation with the person sitting across the table. Meaning, it's not about imagination. It's about living your life with openness, intelligence, responsiveness in the moment. That was a teaching I never forgot. Coben, he's dead now. He married, I forget her name. Shoot, that's terrible. An American, and they had a baby, and they were in Switzerland, and the child was a toddler, and it wandered off into a lake. You know this story? Yeah. And it was drowning. And he went into the lake after with the child and drowned with the child. And I had a very close friend who's passed now, Marty Moscow, who was both a student of Trungpa Rinpoche and a student of Koban. And he became a Roshi, Marty did. But he felt, who knows, that Koban deliberately died so that he could help his daughter, his little child, across, the barrier of death. Who knows? Koban was just a lovely man. Well, we should end. Yes, I can see hands together. Val is giving me the sign. So let's see. Shinyi, how about you? You want to do the chants?
My gun is not with me.
How about Sarah? Got a
Sure.
gong? Okay, I'll put them up. I'm going to mute everybody. So Sarah, unmute yourself.
We will close with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating the merit generated by our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times, and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Good night.
Thanks, John.